Welcome to Implicating the Real. Today's show is part 2 of the conversation began in the previous episode. Let's get right into it. Hope you enjoy.
Alright, this is the last thing I got on this page. The settings in your physical environment, the sometimes lovely paraphernalia, the physical aspects of life as you know it, are all camouflages, and so I call your physical reality a camouflage. Yet these camouflages are composed of the vitality of the universe. The rocks and stones and mountains and earth are living camouflage, interlocking psychic webs formed by minute consciousnesses that you cannot perceive as such. The atoms and molecules within them have their own consciousness, as do the atoms and molecules within your own body.
I was really confused by this part.
The camouflage term particularly, or?
The atoms and molecules having their own consciousness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was kind of like the example I've been using recently with the atom in my thigh choosing the same direction. I mean, this is Seth through and through. Like, every level has its own individualized consciousness.
I wondered if that would be, I guess we talked about that last time, that this almost seems like there's an overdetermination of like will, if we're talking about like free will, you know?
I mean, I wouldn't say overdetermination unless, or let me ask you, what do you mean by that?
Just that, like, so there's me and I have a will that is like acting, but there's also every single component part of me has a will that's choosing the same action. And it's not just every cell in my body, it's every organ in my body, presumably. Like, does my heart have a will separate from the cells of the heart that's separate from my will?
I don't remember if he was using the organs just as an analogy or saying that they also form their kind of own will, but I think you could kind of see it that way.
It just seems like there's so much
will,
so many different wills, that then it becomes a problem of saying like, well, when I say I chose to do something, what does that even mean? You know?
Like from the context of like one of these subconsciousnesses or...
Yeah, like, couldn't the story equally be that I don't have a will and my will is just made up of all of my cells' wills working together? Like, it seems like we're positing so many extra wills that don't need to exist for action to happen. Because like that's sort of how you justify that there is a will, and that we perceive there to be free action happening. So then we ascribe wills to people that we see doing things. Like, I see that a squirrel can move around, and then I'm like, it probably has some sort of intentionality to what it's doing. But I don't then further go like, well, actually it has 20 different intentionalities that are all acting at the same time. Because I'm just extrapolating more theoretical objects out into the world that don't need to be there for the explanation, you know?
Yeah, I think if you're coming from it from like a what can I know perspective.
Yeah.
This is obviously Seth is coming from it from a different place, or claims
from a I already know perspective.
Yeah. And that is a different exercise.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you're basically saying if it doesn't need to exist, then it doesn't. I mean, by that logic, nothing has to exist. But according to our knowledge, nothing, not even base awareness or consciousness has to exist because it's not necessary for anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think like, well, at least the intellectual tradition I come from, right, leans very heavily on skepticism, where it's taken to be a principle of good intellectual hygiene to be skeptical of any explanation, and to say like, for me to posit this explanation to be true, there has to be some reason for it, you know? So it is kind of what you're saying, like, if there's no reason for something, then I should probably assume it doesn't exist. And then you become surprised by things in the world, provoking you needing to have a reason for them, right? Like, I could say like, well, I don't think, because like people for a long time thought animals didn't have mental activity, right? Mm-hmm. But then when you observe animal behavior, you're like, okay, this animal clearly is exhibiting like individual personality.
Right.
So I must posit that there is some kind of actual conscious thing happening for this animal, as opposed to just simply like cowness. Like, every cow doesn't have the same mental world, because cows are different from one another as individuals. So I should posit that there is an individual mind for each cow as opposed to like a group collective like cow supermind, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it's obvious, but that sort of really reductive perception blinds you to seeing a lot of what we know is out there. Like some of the greatest discoveries in science and medicine have been stymied by that sort of ridiculous, almost religiously fanatical skepticism. Like the first surgeon to posit that hand washing can decrease patient mortality after surgery was laughed at, and he died destitute, I think, because people thought it was a joke, and his reputation was just stripped because of this. That's the kind of like, you're taking skepticism way too far now. Like every single big theory that has ever been accepted now in science has initially been met with a ton of skepticism. And
Yeah.
especially for these like really prideful material scientists, I don't think they realize how close they are to being very much like the religious fanatics that they so hate.
Right. But at the end of the day, hand washing did become adopted, right?
Yeah, but the dude, like, his life got really messed up because of it. Like, did we really have to do that? What was the benefit of that such skepticism? They could have just all tried it and been like, oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, my question would be like, why is it basic to assume that an animal, whatever, doesn't have its own individualized personality?
Oh, I think that's a cultural bias thing for sure.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, that's already there. So like, when you're giving this example of being skeptical of that, like that, there's an assumption built in there. So like, what I'm saying is like, we should examine our assumptions. To me, it makes more sense. I see my dog has a personality, and then I see like maybe a lesser intelligent form of an animal, and I look at it closely and I see that also has one. And I like ask myself, like, why shouldn't this extend all the way? Why should I assume that there's a threshold where like individual personality stops? To me, this makes perfect intuitive sense that like Seth could claim even an atom in this physical world has its own will and personality, the same way that everything that I observe, you know, like in my relative level has that. Why shouldn't I extrapolate that instead of assuming there's this magical threshold where like it completely changes?
Well, it's not a magical threshold, right? Like it comes from the mind-body problem. Like the magical threshold is really how minds and bodies interact with one another.
Well, but the mind-body problem has it right there in the title. It's a problem. Like, this is a way of explaining the mind-body problem, right?
No, it isn't.
Why not?
The mind-body problem is saying, how can something that is non-physical interact with the physical world, right?
Right. But I'm saying broadly, this material like explains it in a way.
Well,
in its own way.
It goes into like idealism, right? Where it's like, well, bodies don't actually exist, is the answer.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more accurate to say like the physical world exists as an aspect of mental reality.
Which is just to say that it's not the interaction between mental and physical, it's everything is mental, right? So you eliminate the problem by eliminating physical reality.
Yeah, I think technically that would be true.
Right. So the problem exists in that like you need to express what the mechanism would be. So like in an animal, it's pretty easy to explain what the mechanism would be. Like if you say that minds are a phenomenon that comes out of physical brains, you can see that cows and dogs have physical brains. I don't know if viruses have physical brains, right? So it seems like it'd be weird to posit that viruses have minds.
Right. Well, that's kind of part of the point too, though. Like, you know, that's the other side of the mind-body problem, is taking the materialist view of everything, right? Like,
right.
You're pointing to the brain as being the necessary foundation for a personality or an individuality.
Right, because when we eliminate the brain, people stop having that.
Right. But do you think that's like conclusive? Like there's no way that, you know, there's no explanation outside of that?
I think that there are potential explanations. Like the whole conversation about skepticism is talking about like epistemological question. It's like there are possible explanations. We're trying to choose the best one. That's the whole point, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like there are infinite number of explanations. It's just I want a good explanation, you know?
Well, we're maybe of the perspective of this seems like the best explanation to us as it's hitting us, but like that's kind of what I'm pointing to too is like, to me, just taking the evidence of my own experience, like I extrapolate that way, like, and skepticism, the issue with it is that like you can never get into it without starting from like some point of faith or assumption about reality, right?
I don't
Like
know
the
if that's-
materialist is coming at it from that sort of assumption, and the idealist is coming at it from that sort of assumption.
Sure. I mean, I think you can be an idealist and be a skeptic, right? Like skepticism
Right.
isn't materialism.
But I'm just saying, like, just the use of skepticism in itself doesn't necessarily get you outside of like the assumptions going into it.
Yeah, but I mean, because any system, any like philosophical worldview is going to have base assumptions. It's just like making sure that the observed phenomena correspond with the assumptions, you know?
But like, let's just say this, like, assuming idealism,
Sure.
that everything is mental, is it that hard to believe that an atom in my thumb has its own will?
It becomes hard to justify that belief, right?
I think people get caught up on the base assumption that you're positing because our society is so material. They're going to be like, okay, sure, if we're going to assume that,
Right.
consciousness isn't a product of physical matter, then yeah, that sounds reasonable. But the problem, Michael, is that this assumption. And I think people have a hard time like disconnecting that from that temporarily and being like, okay, we're going to discuss the given assumptions later. Let's just follow this through and then see. Because, I mean, if people just listen to the initial
Well, but that's what I'm doing right now, right? Like I'm granting you the assumption that it's idealist, and then I'm positing, okay, given that we're being idealist, there's still an overdetermination problem. Like that's why the overdetermination problem exists, because even if we're being idealists, we can still want the simplest explanation possible as a practice of like epistemological rigor, right?
Yeah. I mean, I understand that that's a thing. I don't know if we're recording the conversation, but like my own personal issues with Occam's razor is that like I don't think we're always privy to the simplest explanation. Therefore, we might be comparing, a few different explanations that doesn't include that. We might not have like the perspective to have the simplest explanation.
Right.
And I don't think it doesn't necessarily make sense to me that like reality has to follow the simplest explanation.
Forgive me if this is an ignorant question, but can you name like any phenomenon in the world that can be properly explained by the simplest explanation? Because I feel like if you just think about that, you can see that going for the simplest explanation is inherently flawed. Like if you tried to explain world economy based on a simplest explanation, you wouldn't, because you have to factor in like all these other different factors like culture, people's fears, the environment, weather patterns, like all this.
So one example could be if you look at chemistry, right? I can do a lot of different experiments with materials that appear to be similar to one another. And from that, I'm going to extrapolate that they are elementally the same element, right? If I do a reaction that uses like sulfur, the sulfur that I have in America, I'm going to assume is the same thing as the sulfur they have in Europe, right? Because they react in exactly the same way. And that's weird, right? It's weird that every example of the same element behaves exactly the same way. But it is the simplest explanation, given what we observe, right? It could be that every example of sulfur is actually a different thing than each other that just happens to act the same way. But because they all react the same way, we're going to say they're all elementally identical, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you could use that same type of logic to arrive at the wrong conclusion because you made things too simplified. Right. Like, for example, these two are not elementarily similar, but it's like a quality issue, or one of them was hotter than the other, or one of them had impurities.
Right, exactly.
Or you just fucked up the experiment.
Exactly. Yeah, you could.
Okay.
And like a good example of when that gets fucked up is like for a long time people assumed that aether was a thing, right? When they were doing experiments with like flammability and stuff. And it took a really long time for people to like get precise enough experiments to show like, okay, we can have an explanation of what's happening even if we assume aether isn't here, because they thought they needed aether to explain what's going on, but then it turned out they didn't need aether, right? Yeah. And the simpler explanation was to not have it than to have it.
Right.
So we eliminated aether.
Right. That reminds me of that experiment where they thought that air was needed to grow maggots.
Yeah.
Because, like, if they put meat in an airtight container, flies can get it and lay eggs. But they were just like, oh, this is to grow maggots. Must be air.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Abiogenesis, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Whoa, life just comes out of, like, nowhere? That's crazy. Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, like, you can make mistakes all the time with this kind of thinking. It's just that, in general, it allows you to expel things that are not necessary for your system. And if you can't expel things that are posited that aren't necessary, they just kind of will linger, in your explanatory system forever.
Right.
I guess I'm still trying to down into like, why is it overdetermined? Because we don't need to posit that each cell has its own individual.
I'll come at it from a different angle, and maybe that'll explain it a little better. Like, if we're working off of idealist assumptions, then we need to say what our standard for judgment is going to be, because we can still potentially do experimentation with the world and be an idealist, right? By positing that the world still operates under certain regular laws. But we need to still have like a criterion by which we can judge which explanations are good explanations for what's happening. And I'm saying that as an idealist, you could still want to have a system that prevents you from having this like explosion of infinitely many possible explanations. So you want to be able to say, if I'm showing that this thing's happening, I have this specific reason and not this other reason. That's like, I don't want to have an effect that has too many potential causes, because then my linking of cause and effect don't really make sense, So like, if I were to say, like, I want to understand how some interesting, phenomenon happens. Like, I put a stick in the water and then all of a sudden the stick's over here and it's not connected to the top of the stick, right? In an idealist world, you could be like, well, how many people's minds can interact with this stick, right? And you could say that there's a connection to everyone in the room to the stick, like, doing a thing, But you don't want each one of the different person's experience of the stick to be different from one another. It would be easier if they were the same as one another, right? Because then you can have one explanation. But if they're all somehow different from one another, then you can't really give an expression of what's happening, because it means that it's different for everyone. And like, right. your link between cause and effect is not going to make sense in general.
Right. All this is to say is like, even idealists want like
consistency.
Yeah. I'm still not understanding where like this conception of like an atom having its own consciousness is problematic.
Because what does it mean for an atom to have its own consciousness if my consciousness entirely overwhelms the atom? Like, if my consciousness can just make choices and I'm free, right? And I'm choosing what happens with my body, what choice is the atom making?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that's like, my instinct would be to like carry that question forward through the material rather than like saying like, this doesn't make sense or it's too complicated and dismissing that. Like, my attitude would be like, let's try to answer this question in the terms of these ideas here.
That's my attitude too. I'm just saying, like, it's worth flagging and saying, like, this is a thing that needs to be explained. Like,
yeah,
you can't just say it, you have to say why, because sometimes you can just say like, this thing is a thing, but sometimes it requires more explanation.
Well, it gets back to our conversation about identity, remember?
Yeah, exactly.
So that you can't pinpoint it. And like, I was trying to extrapolate from Seth's teachings in various places to say that like, it seems to me like you can call an identity to any action that is unified. Like, and I think that the atom and the thigh or wherever part of my body, we're unified in an action, and therefore we are this identity called Michael, but like Seth is saying, I think it's tricky because he's kind of going all the way down to like the smallest thing. It's harder for us to like grasp that level, but he's saying it goes to that level. But that atom in my thigh, if it does deviate from what I want to do, it jumps into another probability in another Michael's thigh doing what it wants to do. Like, I don't know what it is like to have like atom consciousness or what it wants or what it means to be individual or what its choices are. But like, it seems like this concept is implying that things, every reality and identity is an alignment of choice between all levels of things that are interacting at that level.
That's how I see it too. That's the best explanation I can come up with in my head, is that you and the atom consent instantly. So the atom's like, I want to undergo fission. You're like, no, Adam, not here.
No, please don't.
No, please don't. And then it's like, oh, okay, can I go somewhere else where that happens? And you're like, yeah, go to that timeline where like everything
Where I
goes
just
up.
explode.
Yeah. Yeah. And then some other happy Adam who's just like, yeah, I'm just happy existing, being part of a leg, will come here and be like, I'm your leg now.
I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah.
And I think what he's saying too, at these like quote unquote lower levels of consciousness, like there's more of a broader just like exhilaration in any sort of sensation or new experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that also makes sense to me, that like reality would be built up from that level. We talked about this with pain, or like the cat that was playing with the mouse and stuff. Seth says like the part of the identity that experiences pain negatively leaves, and the body, or those atoms that just thrill in any sort of sensation, physical sensation, that's the part that we see we think is like getting tortured.
Right. But how is it getting tortured if it's just neurotransmitters? Someone has to be at the top to perceive the pain. Otherwise, it's just electrical.
Yeah, right. The pain is just connected to a value system, right? And so that the part of the identity that is like the atoms at that level, like they're just in it for the experience. So like there is no value connected with like the body being torn apart by a cat's paw. It's just a different sensation. So all of this is to say, like, it makes sense to me that reality is built up from those layers of like generalized, like welcoming of like all different experiences. Even though Seth is saying like the atom has its own individuality, it may be like a low level individuality where it doesn't really mind if it like follows my lead.
So here's a question about that. We said that the mind just projects physical reality into the world. Why couldn't the mind create, because I guess the answer is that it could, but like why doesn't the mind create a body that just only has one consciousness? Like everything's still made the same, it just doesn't have cells, or it doesn't have consciousnesses in the cells, right?
For all we know, it might. He says there are other realities that are non-physical.
Yeah.
Other realities that are so alien to us, we would have a really hard time imagining them. Like, I think he said there was one reality where it was either there's no light or there's only heat, or vice versa or something like that.
Weird. But like, what's the purpose in the first place for having all these consciousnesses packed into your body or packed into a rock,
I feel like, well, that's a good question. I don't know. I feel like that's the nature of this sort of dimension, that it's like...
Why do people like to play extras in plays? Why doesn't everyone just gun for the protagonist and antagonist role?
Yeah.
If you can play an extra in one play and then be like the main character in another play. If you're like eternally, this goes back to like heaven would be really lame and boring. If you're just eternally existing, wouldn't you want to experience everything? From like living like a king to a pauper, feeling how it would feel to be an entity, and then like an individual human, and then a leg, and then a cell, and then an atom, and then a quark.
The way I'm thinking of it is that consciousness is just the basic building blocks of everything. Like, and I don't know if there is any place where like we can like be like have a physical reality, and so have like consciousness like making up our like quote unquote like material body without it being individualized in a way. It's only individualized in a way of speaking, right? You have to like isolate the atom to say it's individualized, but like in another way, it's fully uniformed one identity. Like I think by coming together in this way, it is just the one, everything, all the atoms in my body are Michael.
Well, that's the other thing too, that like, remember we had the conversation about like physical objects are actually like made in multiple for each consciousness that perceives them.
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean that like the table would have a different table for every atom in the table because they're all perceiving the table at the same time, right? Or do these consciousnesses not have like sensory perception? Is that like what we're assuming?
Yeah,
because that was a
if I can
feature.
speak to like what they're perceptive abilities or their experiences. But like, doesn't quantum physics also acknowledge that we're like constantly, at the quantum level, we're constantly changing, like our particles are blinking on and blinking off and moving and...
Right, but as an idealist, you're not using quantum physics, right?
I mean, you're not thinking in it as like basically physical, but you're not disregarding it.
I'm just saying, like, you don't need to lean on it as an explanatory framework if you're already not being a materialist, you know?
I'm leaning on it just to the extent that I'm trying to convince materialists to be idealists.
But like, because like, okay, so sensory perception happens in that instead of the thing hitting your sensory organs and you perceive it, you are projecting the thing out using your sensory organs. But in projecting it out, you're also ordering all the other consciousnesses to form the thing that it is. But they're free to do so because they choose to do so. And not only do I do that, but all the consciousnesses in this table, are they the same or different than the consciousnesses in the table you're perceiving?
I guess that's probably covered at some point. I don't know. I don't have that deep of a grasp.
It's just like, that's the thing where like when we start talking about atoms and stuff, Seth says these things that seem like somewhat contradictory about how stuff works on the molecular level, you know? Because there's also the thing about like, you can shrink your body down to the size of an atom if you want, right?
I don't think he said you can shrink your body. I think he said
you did physically.
your awareness. Yeah.
Well, but that's the same thing, right? Your awareness and your body are the same thing.
But that's not
No.
idealistic.
I don't think they're the same thing.
They're the same thing.
Your body is a way that your awareness is experiencing something. So like,
Because remember, you
We're
can make
still-
the room smaller if you wanted to.
well, yeah, we're still in the rules of the game, right? And so like our awareness can be tiny, but like we can't shrink our body.
You can also put your awareness somewhere other than your body is. That's presumably why the remote viewing experiments were so successful. And that's why so many materialist scientist doctors have realized that there is something more to near-death experiences when people flatline or die, and they perceive information geographically distant from their body that they could not have otherwise seen. They see this happen so often, and it can't be explained by deprivation of oxygen or a rush of DMT into the brain, especially in cases where they were monitoring brain activity and it was nil.
Right, yeah,
But the person's able to see like what happened in a room when their eyes were taped shut.
right.
And those experiences, it depends on, whether those doctors if their assumptions are allowing that to become evidence when the person wakes up and has this anecdotal experience.
Exactly. And
Either gets like totally dismissed.
So there is an example in the rules of this game where you can have your perceptions operating separately from the rest of the consciousnesses that make up your physical body.
yes, that's what convinced me because I was born into material science and I just kept seeing evidence of this. And if you're actually going to follow the scientific method instead of being religiously fanatic about science and skeptic to a fault, then you have to admit that as evidence. And Michael, it's funny you say that because there was like some conference somewhere of doctors who get together to talk about this. And at one point, this one cardiologist stood up during a lecture and was like, no, this is bunk because my patients never spoke to me about this when they flatlined. And then another doctor stood up and said, no, I am one of your patients and it happened to me. I don't talk to you about it because you're so close-minded about it.
That's awesome.
Well, even to say the first part, even that was true, that's not evidence. It's just his experience. Like, yeah. I mean, it's basically what like lucid dreaming, or not lucid dreaming, but like astral projection is too. Is like the ability to like keep your body in your bed and your awareness can like wander around the world and like view things.
Yeah. But I think that Seth does say that there's that, and then there's also like being able to be aware of something different without actual projecting. Like, there's multiple ways to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Chapter 7.
Go to chapter 7. We'll talk about it.
I'm going to jump ahead a page just to read one sentence here. And I think it kind of ties back to where we jumped off from.
Sure.
Your real environment is composed of your thoughts and emotions. For from these you form not only this reality, but each reality in which you take part. I wanted to like pair that sentence with the interlocking psychic webs formed by minute consciousnesses that you cannot perceive as such. Often when Seth says your real environment, blah, 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 my mind and maybe a lot of people, like, I think of this like other place that's the real environment. But it's actually right here, right now, our real environment. And this is just our experience of that real environment is this specific way right now. Like our thoughts and emotions, and elsewhere he says electromagnetic reality, you know, our experiences of those are the rocks and stones and mountains and earth that are living camouflage, interlocking psychic webs formed by minute consciousnesses that you cannot perceive. Like he's saying our real environment is our thoughts and emotions, and our physical reality and our experience as physical beings is limited to this like instantiation of this sort of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like somehow like reviewing this, like I was just linking those two things together.
No, that makes sense.
It's hard to like not every time he says your real environment to think of like, oh, that's some other place I gotta get to.
That's some other dimension outside of...
Yeah, it's another place.
Well, because it's sort of... Yeah, it's hard because it is outside of time and space, but in the sense that we can't perceive past it to see where we already are, you know?
Yeah.
It's the thing in itself, you know?
We're playing the video game and we can't look away.
I don't think of it as like it's somewhere else. I think of him saying like it's right here.
Well, that's what my point is. The like it's hard for me when I read this often. Like that's immediately where my mind goes. It's like, oh, it's another place. But I'm saying like I'm too caught up in my ideas of like time and space to like properly appreciate what he's saying. Your real environment. He's not talking about like something. He's talking about like this right here.
Yeah, because there's the vortexes, right? They're right here.
Yeah, whatever. Like there is actually no space in the terms we think of it.
Yeah.
I can't help it. It's funny you mentioned video games. I can't help it. When you read this quote, I just think of that, where I'm like, okay, how many hours have I and everyone spent staring at a screen? You're either watching a movie or you're playing a video game, and you form this world in your head, and like you just shut the rest of the room out. But really, your quote-unquote real environment in this situation it's just pixels on a screen. Photons are coming out into your eyeballs. Mm-hmm. There is no, like, there's no Harry Potter world. There is no, like, what you're making is so real to you, but you forget that it's just the monitor's right there.
Yeah. I do love how, like, we're constantly finding these reminders of examples of reality enveloping in the same way that our culture is, like, produced, like, theater and movies and games and video games and all these things, like, emulate. Like, you can really... I think you can take from looking at our culture like that like in the same way, you know, children are emulating their parents, we are like creating reality in the same way that we don't consciously perceive or understand, but like intuitively understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think before video games, it was books, because how often have you read a book and just the whole world shuts out? Or you're just storytelling, sitting around a fire telling stories.
There's never been a culture that like didn't like constantly tell stories.
Oh yeah. And you know, we have examples of like very ancient cultures too doing like really interesting forms of like creating new physical spaces too. Like there's this one example I'm thinking of a temple that like the way it's laid out, it almost seems like it's sort of like a weird like fun house kind of effect where they would put like mirrors and stuff in to like have shafts of light come into this like cave, and they have these like big statues that like if you're standing in it the proper way with the light oriented the right way, it would like look really weird and like it's moving around and stuff.
Really? Cool.
So like people would presumably take some kind of mild hallucinogen and like go into this thing, and then you'd have priests that would like be making noises and like moving the lights around and stuff. Wow, so like
a haunted house.
So it's like a haunted house kind of, yeah.
But they like took it seriously. It wasn't just like, they take it for like this emotional thrill.
It's
this
so
is
you
like
can meet the god.
Yeah,
it's like in the place. Yeah,
I think that like in terms of like Castaneda's like assemblage point, or even like Everything Everywhere All at Once had this, where like you had to do something like shocking to kind of like move perceptual dial.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like that's what I think of, like all those strange rituals that, you know, that are strange to us, modern normal people. Like, I feel like that's really what is that's the intention there.
Yeah.
And then again, I think it's like, it can be something we don't like consciously understand, but we do it because we intuitively understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, it's like we were talking before, you have to experience to have wisdom, right?
Yeah.
But you could see like those cultures doing those things without understanding that the zoomed out effect is like, logically, we're just shocking them so that their awareness can shift out of their normal assumptions and they can experience something greater.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to wrap up these couple pages here? Do we have anything in the last few? There's the lighted stage exercise.
Have you ever done the lighted stage exercise?
Oh, yeah.
Did it work for you?
No. But I'm told many times that like it's okay if it doesn't work, keep doing it. Do I? No.
Yeah.
But I've never been one for really like meditative practices. I get really bored.
It would be, I do want to like adopt it. He just says like 10 minutes a day is quite sufficient. Like I can spare 10 minutes to like give this its due.
I know I should, especially since Rick Stack's Seth Intensive course basically says that this exercise, which I think he nicknamed psy-time, psychological time,
psy-time,
is really helpful in unlocking your like higher intellect. And
it's kind of tough. I tried it and I found that I was not good at the visualization part. Like I can sit restfully for like a decent amount of time, but like trying to like imagine a stage around me and like really convince myself that I'm sitting on a stage is like very hard to do.
Yeah, that initial part.
Yeah.
I will say that it gets a lot easier with practice. And I think everyone's max potential is probably different. Like you have people who are just able to visualize really well, and then you have people who are like able to have form a scene even after years of practice. But I don't think that Seth would say like, oh, if you're not doing it with full sensory vividness, all five senses, imagine that you're not going to get the benefit of it.
Yeah. Do you want to describe what this is just for the listener?
Yeah.
If they want to try this exercise?
I got some of the main points highlighted here. So basically, pretend you're on a lighted stage. Close your eyes. Everything is dark. Be quiet. Imagine as vividly as you can the existence of inner senses. Clear your thoughts and worries. Be receptive. Very gently listen, not to physical sounds, but to sounds that come through the inner senses. So right off the bat, that imaginative exercise is just to basically like put our whole reality into this smaller context of like a play. And it's easier for us to do that because then we can like, oh, everything we know is just sitting on a stage and there's this infinitely grander world out there. But then we're asked to like pretend that there's an inner world that will be revealed to you as you learn to perceive it. Even the inner senses, like, we don't really know what he means, especially like reading this first book in chapter 4. Like we're just using the imagination to kind of like leap.
Mm-hmm.
So that I do think we have to, when we're starting an exercise like this, we just have to accept whatever comes and be patient. And he says that. It says, pretend that you have been blind to this world all your life, and now you are slowly gaining sight within it. Do not judge the whole inner world by the disjointed images that may at first perceive.
That you may first perceive.
Yeah, sorry.
So you're just like opening up your mind to just like whatever sensations, sounds, images, whatever comes from your internal psychology. You're just supposed to kind of let them happen.
Yeah, I think basically you're putting all of our reality into this stage context, but you're putting our physical senses into that context, and you're leaving them all there, and then using your imagination as a platform to jump off from, imagining there's a larger world and there's these other senses, and just be open to what comes through them.
I feel like this would be easier to do if you're like really tired, because it seems like what happens when you're like starting to get into sleep, you know?
He does say you can do this a few moments before sleep or in a resting state.
My experience is like there's a threshold where it's ideal. If you're too tired, you just fall asleep.
Yeah.
You know? But if you're a little bit sleepy, then you can kind of let go of we kind of like cling on to our normal awareness, I think. And sometimes it's easier to let go.
I just know I tried to do it right away in the morning, like right after I'd woken up. And I like sat down by the window and I was like, all right, I'm going to imagine the stage. Like, what are the sounds that are coming? What are the images? and all I could hear was the birds in the out the window just chirping at me, you know? And I'm like, those are just birds that are actually just right there, man.
He does say, and I want to let the reader know this also, that he says, don't judge the disjointed images or the sounds that you may first perceive, because right now you're using your inner senses imperfectly. And like, you're only going to be perceiving snatches in the beginning. You know, don't attempt to make any overall judgments or interpretations at this stage, he says. I think it's frustrating because when you first start, it's like, I don't feel like I'm getting any value out of this. That's why I stopped, even though I know intellectually and I'm told a lot that it's a really good exercise to do. But
right. You think of anything that you're learning to do the first time, it takes, you have to probably give it that amount of patience, like you learning to ride a bike or speak a language. You can't just like try once and like, oh, it doesn't work.
Yeah, you have to make mistakes, and you have to don't judge yourself too hard with whatever happens.
The difference with this is like, we don't perceive other people doing this. You
Right.
know, that's usually how we are like incentivized to like jump into a new challenge. You know, like, oh, I see other people doing this. I want to do it. I know it's possible. This takes a little more of like buy-in, you know, or just.
Was there anything in the class about like group psy-time?
not that I know, actually, no.
I feel like that could be a fun exercise, because there's the thing where you can like be in the same dream space as each other.
Right, and he did ask the class members at one point to work in their dream city together, which is really cute.
They're
Yeah.
building a little dream city like all as a group. I love that. Yeah, because like if you can presumably be in the same dream space, you could presumably be in the same like stage space, you know?
Right. But I think this specifically, he wouldn't have it in a group setting because he's teaching you to listen to your inner senses, like which I interpret, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, to be intuitions or like pieces of information that your entity is giving you.
Right.
So if it's a group one, you have to find other people of your same entity, which like, I don't know, there's a way to...
Get on Craigslist.
Yeah.
I mean, a group setting might have a different set of like advantages. I could imagine maybe like, I know my experience in meditation retreats, the idea is that like the group does set a frequency, so it's easier for people that are struggling to kind of like get there right away.
Yeah.
But like, I do agree with what you're saying that like, I did the group past life regression hypnotism, and I felt like I was going a little slower than the group, and it would have been better if it was just individualized and
Yeah.
we weren't getting to step 4 before I was at step 2, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens when you're on your first life, man, you know?
It's tough.
You try to do past life regression and just nothing comes up.
It makes me think of, so I run sprints once a week, and, you know, so when I'm visiting my family, like I have my nieces and nephews, and they're all, a lot of times when they were younger, they're like, they wanted to like join me in my sprints. And my youngest nephew, or at the time, youngest nephew, Finn, he was like 2 or 3. I would sprint down the street and then walk back. He and his siblings and cousins are doing this with me. It's pretty fun, but he's like sprinting as fast as he can, but he's such a little guy that he's just like sprints all the way there, and we're like walking back, and like he has to sprint back just to catch up to us. And it's just like, he's just, you know, at that level, like he just has to try harder.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so cute that he was like so much into it, more into it than any of us.
Oh, dude, you tell little kids that they get to just run?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the winter, I'll run it in a community center, and often there's like kids. So the track is like above a gym, and there'll be kids in either on the track or like on the gym, but like they see me sprinting, and they're like, I would say like 65% of them like tell their mom like, I want to go do that.
Oh.
It's funny.
The universal love for just running.
I think that gets back to like what we were talking about too, with like that more elemental like part of atoms just wanting just thrilling and pure exhilaration or sensation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, adult puts a judgment before that, like, that's painful, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it is painful for us.
But maybe it's painful because we stopped running at some point.
True. Yeah, it's not painful for Michael. He can keep it.
Well, and I think it's definitely less painful if I hadn't been doing it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kids would plow right through the pain if enjoying themselves.
Oh yeah.
Or even if it was just a new experience.
Yeah, it is weird how pain works for them, where they can experience like things that should be painful and just walk it off. But then like they have the tiniest little scratch and they're like, I'm dying. You know, like it's all about like their perception of like if the thing is threatening.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I was reading this book this week that was talking about how like children in China will line up for tonsillectomies, smiling going into it, and they get it and they just walk away and it's fine. But children in America, like tonsillectomy is this huge thing. They go in the hospital, they have to like be put under general anesthesia. It hurts a bunch afterwards. Like it takes days to recover.
Yeah.
And the author was basically like, why this has happened? It's because in China, it's presumably, I'm Chinese, but like I was born and raised here, so I'm like super American. Presumably, it's because in Chinese culture, they're told that like pain is not a big deal, just like whatever. It's not.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing they say with like childbirth too in some cultures where like childbirth like is experienced as like less painful in cultures where it's assumed that it's like not that bad. You know?
Yeah.
And like the more you psych yourself up for it, the like worse it is.
Yeah. Oh man, that reminds me of this. I was watching some documentary or YouTube video once about this one culture in Africa where, I think it was Africa, they had this coming of age ritual for boys where they take these ants that bite with excruciating pain and they fill up these mitts with those ants and the boys have to like wear those mitts for an hour, I think. And it's so excruciating that the like documentarian who went there to, like, you know, the guy behind the microphone who's recording this and talking about it, they had him bitten by one ant and he was just like laid up for hours. And there's these like boys who were like 11 and 12 doing this.
That's crazy.
Whoa. Are they venomous?
If they're like painful on that level, they probably
they
have
are.
a venom. Yeah.
Right.
Do you think there's like some sort of like delirium sets in or something? Or did...
Well, if you have enough pain, your body kicks in with endorphins.
Yeah.
That's runner's high. But I think it's just that these boys don't have a choice. They're told, like, you have to, what are you going to do? Like, stop growing or just die? Like, you have to become a man.
Yeah.
I feel like there is too, like, like making it a ceremony and making it a social experience can, like, transform pain into something else. You know?
Yeah. Especially when your whole tribe is watching and rooting for you. Like, it's...
Yeah. Interesting.
Plus,
I
I don't know.
wonder if it is like the, you know, the cat and the mouse thing they were talking about, where like you're the part of your consciousness that judges and therefore experiences pain just kind of leaves, and you like adopt this higher or lower consciousness.
Right. Plus, I don't know if these kids are like dissociating or not.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, I've spent some time emphasizing the fact that each of us forms our own environment because I want you to realize that the responsibility for your life and your environment is your own. If you believe otherwise, then you are limited. Your environment then represents the sum total of knowledge and experience. As long as you believe your environment to be objective and independent of yourself, then to a large extent you feel powerless to change it.
To see beyond it or to imagine other alternatives that may be less apparent.
Yeah.
External versus internal locus of control.
Does that make sense at all to you?
I think it's really interesting in the context of what we had talked about with it being a collective like endeavor, where like the first time I read this, I assumed it was like, oh, you personally are responsible for everything, right? It's the internal locus of control thing. But there's like the aspect to it too where it's like you are responsible in the sense that if you are a co-creator with a group of people of a thing, you are all collectively responsible, right? And that collective responsibility is what your responsibility is, you know?
Yeah, I would say there's an individual responsibility and a collective. Like, your individual responsibility isn't designed
you're responsible
exclusively as part of the collective.
Is it not?
I don't think
that's
so.
what I was perceiving.
I don't think so. Like, you're not... Again, it gets back to, like, everything that happens to you, you consented to on some level.
Exactly.
Other people will play the role for you.
Yeah, and like you're responsible to want, like if you want to change it, you're responsible to go to this collective body and be like, I want this to be changed. I imagine something different. We can do something differently. You know, that it's like a everyone in the universe thing, you know?
Yeah. I feel like we touched upon this before, but like we talked about like how the news is the bad news and it's easy for people in our society to like be overburdened with all the pain and suffering in the world. And this was where this kind of takes me, or what you brought up. Seth is trying to stress that like the individual doesn't have to shoulder that level of weight. Right. And he says in not so many words, and I should try to find it at some point, but like the way you make the best positive impact on the world is like actually by like following your own passion. The example I always think to is like, you know, it's an extreme example obviously, but like if John Lennon, you know, wanted to like just consciously decide to like save the world, maybe he opens up a nonprofit, but instead follows his passion. You know, like the Beatles produced this music that like helps bring together all these like conflicting countries, you know, like it just like unites the world in a way that you can't even quantify. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that like we all have like our truest passion, and we just have to tap into that, and like we have to some extent like that sort of effect on the world. You know, it cuts through our ideas of like cause and effect, you know, being a positive force in the world. It gets back into Seth's idea of spontaneity. Like we follow this and it ends up being the right path, because when we let go of our limited conceptions, like our higher self can step in and steer us into the probability that's going to work. Bottom, it says, creativity and consciousness are never linear achievements. That just adds into what I was trying to say there. Call that a chapter?
I just want to mention the last few paragraphs where he's saying the things that happen to you in your life are not based on childhood events or past life experiences, because everything is simultaneous, including your past lives. He doesn't like to call them past lives. He just calls them like reincarnational lives. But also your childhood and your future in this life are all happening now, and they're changeable.
Yeah. You're not on any given path that you have to stick on. You're not beholden to, oh, I was a bad person in a bad life, so now I have to suffer for it. Even in this life, if you were a bad person and you want to change, you can change. Yeah.
Yeah, the power is yours. Ball's in your court. Point of power is the present.
Yeah, that's a very encouraging sentiment, to be told that, yeah, you're not bound. I mean, I like hearing it, whether it's true or not.
Yeah. We just all exist in the ever-present man.
Yeah. Is the point of power present exercise, is that nature reality?
I think it's nature present reality.
Yeah, that's one of the main ones. It'll come up. Yeah.
That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fond good evening.